people leaving because the auditors suddenly stood up. They say that when you make a speech or give a talk, you should never, ever begin by apologizing for anything. So I'm not going to do that. Well, I'm not going to apologize for one thing. I'm going to apologize for two things, or rather express a regret for two things. Since 2009, it's been my privilege to audit local church accounts. I think I've performed over 100 of these audits now. But it was not until I started to audit the local church accounts that I really understood just how onerous the task of the local church treasurer is. And I wish to recognize now that I realize that you have a very, very onerous job and do a tremendous job. The second thing is, when you start to audit and you say, have you got this and have you got that and have you done the other, very often people say, well, nobody ever told me. And I look back at 37 years in denominational treasury, and I think, do you know what, we had officer training at the beginning of each year, but you can't do too much in a couple of hours. And I do regret that we didn't really get by the side of you as treasurers much more than we did do, and to help you in your task. So as I go through the audit procedures this morning, I may be saying a lot of do's and don'ts, and you have every right to say to me, well, you never told us that before. But I think that's the value of this gathering that we have with us today, because this is a training session, and hopefully moving forward, we will be able to get, as a church, much closer to your sides and help you in your work. My presentation is in two parts, really. The first one is to look at the audit and what it's all about. Is it just a necessary evil, or is it actually something wider and deeper than that? And then the second part will be getting down into some of the nuts and bolts of what we do, and most of the things that I will be saying are as the result of issues that have come to my attention during the course of auditing local church accounts, and which are fairly common to most of the audits which I do. So without any more ado, let's have a look at the church. Whether we like it or not, the local church is not an independent organization. It is part of a registered charity, which is your conference or your mission. And so the accounts that you are keeping as treasurers should really reflect the accounting standards which are applicable to registered charities. When I review the accounts, I do them in the light of those standards. And I've got a question mark after this one. Should our local church accounts be compatible with those of the parent organization, that is the conference or the mission? And I put this here because it has been something of a surprise to me that over all the years that we as a church have been a registered charity in our various entities, that the Charities Commission has never said, why do you not consolidate the accounts of your local churches into those of your charity? Because there is a huge economy in the local churches, and it's not reflected in the conference books or in the missions books. One of these fine days, that might just change. Let's pray earnestly that it doesn't, but it might just. And so I think moving forward, this is something for the conference and for you as local churches to consider, having your accounts set out in such a way that if ever we were asked to consolidate our accounts all together, this would be much more readily done than if we all have our own little way of doing things and our own little set of accounts. What is the basis of the financial reviews which I conduct? Well, there are two of them. We are too small as individual congregations to have a full financial audit. There's nothing to stop us having one, but normally a full financial audit is for large charities. There are, however, regulations which are known as independent examinations of charity accounts. And these are much more suitable to smaller organizations the size of our local churches. The only thing is the local churches aren't charities, so they cannot be reviewed under these regulations as such. In other words, when I perform a review, I cannot call it an independent examination. However, they are very, very suited to us, and so I generally review the accounts in harmony with these regulations. And then the other document which I refer to quite often is the Charity Commission's document. It's CC8 if you collect document numbers. And it's the internal financial controls for charities which the Charities Commission produces. And if you ever have a chance to download this CC8, you will find it very, very informative, very easy to read and very helpful. And of course, I haven't noted it down here, but I also have an eye to church policy when I do the reviews as well. What are the advantages of this sort of basis? Well, it provides a review of accounts that is linked closely to a statutory framework. It is suitable for smaller charitable entities, as I've already said, and it's objective. It's not me coming along saying, I think I'll have a look at this, I think I find that important, I don't find the other very important, I'm going to miss that out. It's very objective. It tells me what I should be looking at. I don't decide what I look at. It's standard. It means that every single church gets reviewed in exactly the same way every single time. And also it's sensitive to changes in regulations and what we call in the charity sector best practice. So if there are changes, they will be reflected in the regulations which I work to, and then I can bring those to the attention of the church as I do my work. What are the purposes of these standards and of the reviews which I and others like me conduct? Well, first of all, it's to protect the church's assets and to protect its reputation. We see that everything is done properly and in order and is above board and is well protected by insurance. And as Steve has been telling you, things are agreed through SDAA where they need to be. And this protects our assets and it protects our reputation as well. It helps promote statutory compliancy and it aids in church governance because, as we will see later on, some of the things that are expected of the Treasury Department, it helps the church board and it helps the church business meeting to know precisely where they stand, how they've been performing, what their position is. And if it's helping the church be governed well, it is also automatically helping the church in its mission. It protects the Treasury team by confirming its work. When I retired, I started to do some work and did for several years until last year with the General Conference Auditing Service. And I was introduced to the very interesting concept of professional skepticism. Sounds pretty ominous, doesn't it? And basically what I gathered it meant was you go in expecting to find something is wrong, and you perform loads of tests to ensure that your fears are not realized. I'm uncomfortable with that. When I go to a local church to review its accounts, I go there expecting to find everything tickety-boo. I do perform tests, and if it's not tickety-boo, I will find out. But I go there to confirm the Treasury in the work that they are doing. And nothing gives me greater joy than to be able to see good sets of accounts, well produced, well run, and to be able to give a nice tick at the end of the report. And it also helps aid the Treasury team by signalling best practice when perhaps it's not being followed. I think this is somewhere where we need to improve the process, certainly in the North England Conference, because it's the North England Conference that gives me the churches which I am to review, and I report to its trustees. I think there needs to be a little bit of work done, perhaps, from the feedback I'm getting, of the reports then getting to the local churches that have been reviewed so that they know what has been said where they are doing well, and where there is a need to perhaps change things and do it a different way. The scope of the review, it looks at receipts and payments for the year. It looks at how you record all the various transactions that you have during the year. It looks at your financial planning. It looks at your financial reporting. We'll talk a little bit about these later on. And also, I look at internal financial controls. How good are your internal controls to protect your finances? So without further ado, let's go into the nuts and bolts of the review. And we start, I'll be doing cash receipts, cash payments, bank receipts, bank payments, and then the reporting, the planning and the reporting. So we start off at the first point, and that is the deacons' offerings record book. For those of you that have this book with the apostrophe before the S, please Tipp-Ex it out and put the apostrophe after the S. The book belongs to many deacons, not just one deacon. Complete on the Sabbath of receipt. That sounds like stating the obvious, but I have come across on occasions one or two of these offerings books which have been receipted upon the treasurer having told them or giving them a receipt for how much they have got in the plate. No, it needs to be done on the Sabbath of receipt. The second thing is 2 deacons count the offerings, they complete the entries, and they sign it off and co-sign it. Treasurers, hands off. You are not part of this process. And I'll tell you the reason why. It is to protect you as much as anybody else. The Charities Commission is very, very keen on the segregation of duties. And as far as possible, they are not happy when one person is being involved in a process from the beginning to the end. So it is for your interest as much as anybody else's that the offerings are independently counted apart from the Treasury team. That is why it is called a deacon's offerings record book. In the book, there is a space for including the receipt numbers for offerings that you've passed on to the treasurer, and the treasurer gives you a receipt in return. Perhaps. We will touch on that a little bit later. But make sure if you are getting a receipt that you record the number, because this helps cross-reference what you have counted to the entries in the set of accounts that the treasurer keeps. If you have corrections, please draw a line through them and rewrite that line. Do not overwrite. This might seem like a simple thing, but many times when I look at the offerings book, I find very often, in fact, numbers have been written over, and it's very difficult. It looks more like Japanese letters than figures. It's very difficult for me to say, well, that's what the deacons counted and signed off. So please put a line through it, do not overwrite. If the receipt that you get back from the treasurer, and I should be talking to the deacons now, but you tell your deacons this if you wouldn't mind. If the receipt that you write out for the offerings differs from that of the deacons should not change the deacon's offerings record book. They should simply make a note that the amount that the treasurer has receipted is thus. And if there is, and I think you should look into why there are differences, and perhaps on the back of the page, the opposite page, which is clear, write a little note of why there is a difference. I think one of the main differences, if I understand it, is because sometimes the plate offerings will be counted up, the money will be passed over to the treasurer, and then someone who has missed the offering comes running in saying, I've just got my purse from the car, here's an extra £5 to go into the offering, and the treasurer adds that to the plate offering and gives a receipt for the whole amount. But in actual fact, that's not the amount they receive from the deacons. So that's why sometimes there are differences. And if there are differences, the deacon should note why, and what they are. Then we come to cash receipts. Write and issue a receipt for each item of cash received. There are many, many of our churches that do not have receipt books. The conference has these. They are bespoke to us as a church, and I would encourage every single treasurer to make sure they get from the conference a receipt book. And once again, we are looking at the internal financial controls, and we're looking at the 2 pairs of eyes principle. And that is, the deacons say, we have counted £520. We have given it to you as a treasurer. You say, yes, I have counted £520. You give that receipt to the deacons. Both of you are in agreement as to what the amount in the offering plate was. There is no question afterwards then of the deacons saying, well, we counted 520 and the treasurer only said it's 500. So write a receipt for each plate offering, for each individual donation, if you get individual donations, or if you hire your property out for weddings and things like this, and you charge for it, make sure you write a receipt, and that you issue the receipt. In quite a few churches that I've been to, they have a receipt book, they've written receipts, and the receipts are still in the receipt book, which somehow defeats the purpose of the exercise. Show the purpose of the monies that you've received. For the most part, these are self-explanatory. The church budget offering is the church budget offering. But sometimes as I go around and I check the receipt books, I'll see something like special offering. But I don't know what it's for. And it's important that we know what it's for, because very often special offering has been given for a particular purpose. That means it's restricted monies, and charity regulations expect us to follow that restricted money right the way through from its receipt to its disbursement, so that we have an audit trail of restricted funds. And sometimes you'll have a receipt which says concert. Well, what was the proceeds of the concert for? So make sure that where it's not self-evident, you write in your receipt book the purpose of the offering that has been given. Please ensure that the copies are legible. I take a magnifying glass around with me. And even then, sometimes the copies are so faint that they are not legible. And that really defeats, again, the purpose of the exercise, because the receipt book copies are a record of the monies that you have receipted, and if they can't be read, then they can't be verified. I put this with a question mark as well, that we encourage our members to give via the plate offerings. You're writing out 52 receipts a year for the plate offering, but many, many times I'll see 5 or 6 other receipts for individual donations to the building fund, most usually, which means that instead of writing 52 receipts a year, you're writing something like 350 or 300 receipts a year. And that's an awful lot of work and an awful lot of reviewing to be done as well. So I put a question mark there. It's not something which is mandatory, but if we could encourage our members, if you're giving to the building fund, for example, put it in the plate offering, marked for the building fund, rather than expecting a separate receipt for that. And then finally, and we were reminded last night as to why this is important, we should deposit the monies that we received in the bank promptly for insurance purposes and in full. Very, very often, churches will retain money out of the plate offering in order to make petty cash disbursements. And the Charity Commission are not keen on this at all. They say you should keep a separate petty cash float for that. Make sure that the monies you receive, you bank them as early as you can, and you bank them in full. And that way there is a much clearer audit trail which results. Cash payments. Pay from a cash float, as I've just mentioned, not from retained cash receipts. And I'm suggesting that we use a payment authorization form. Many of our churches actually use these authorization forms. And what it does is it has the signature of the treasurer and the co-authorizer and the recipient, who all sign that this money, this payment has been authorized and that has been received as well. The Charity Commission actually suggests that the person who authorizes these payments should be other than the person who actually makes the payments. But they do give leeway, and they do say that when it comes to relatively small amounts, then in our case, the treasurer can just make it without having to have somebody else authorize it. But I think it would be useful in your church boards to have an action which allows you as a treasurer to disperse petty cash up to £50, £75, whatever it is you decide is appropriate, without having to have somebody else come along and authorize it with you. And then attach supporting documentation. Cash payments in particular, this is a problem. Many, many times I look at the supporting documentation and it will consist of envelopes stuffed full of till receipts from Asda and Morrison's. It's quite an interesting indication, I think, of where we stand as a church in society, that most of our shopping seems to be done in Asda and Morrison's. Very, very few from Lidl and Aldi. One or two from Tesco's and Sainsbury's. And I have a bit of a dilemma if I ever see receipts coming from Waitrose or M&S Food Hall. I have to ask myself if this is a reportable offence. But seriously though, make sure you attach the till receipts to your payment authorization form so that the money that you have paid out and the support for that, the evidence for that, is all in one place. Show the date, the amount, who you've paid the money to, and the purpose of the payment. And then I would suggest that you number these authorization forms. You enter the details into the accounts, and then you file them in numerical order. You then have a very, very ordered way of recording all the payments that you have made. The Charity Commission also say that we should keep our cash payments to the minimum. They are not too comfortable with large numbers and large amounts of payments made out of cash, and do suggest that we pay by check rather than by cash. And I realize that for many churches this is a logistical concern, because you may have many people from many departments who are in their own time making purchases and then coming for reimbursement, and the thought of having to make out 10 checks a week to repay these people is quite daunting. So there is a logistical problem here, but just bear in mind that the Charity Commission do suggest that we keep the number of cash payments to an absolute minimum. Bank receipts I'll go through very, very, very quickly. It would help if on the back of the paying in stubs you were to write down the numbers of the receipts that you are depositing in the bank, because that also gives a very quick cross-reference so that it can be readily seen that what you have received and receipted has been deposited in the bank. I would suggest that you get a bank voucher, for want of a better term, a sheet of paper on which you record the deposits of cash into the bank or direct credits which come onto your bank account. Show the date, the amount, the source of this income and its purpose. Again, attach any supporting documents. So, for example, when you receive the advices back from the conference office for monies they have paid into your bank account for offerings that have been paid via gift aid, attach that to the back of the bank voucher as supporting documentation. And again, number these, record the entries in the accounts, and then file them separately in a folder for ready. Sorry? Too quick? Actually, Earl, were these notes not in the pack? If you don't have it in your pack, we'll make sure that these are sent out to you. Yes, they are.
We have had a request from some treasurers for Marcus's presentation, but there are information along these lines in your treasurer's manual as well. So Lucinda, stand up, or Steve, stand up. So there should be. Can you see that? There should be something in your pack. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any spare ones that I can have? Yeah.
If anybody doesn't have one, just let Earl know, and we'll make sure that it's either get a hard copy or get one emailed to you afterwards.
Okay, I think Marcus, we'll email it to them as well.
Sorry?
We'll email it to them after.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I did think to do it. Once again, when you make bank payments, it's suggested that you have a payment authorization form. Again, many churches do this. And on this, you, as treasurer, will sign. If you need a co-authorizer, they will sign with you. Record on this the date that checks are drawn, the amount, the payee that you are paying, and the purpose of the payment. And again, attach supporting documentation, invoices, or whatever it happens to be. And as with the other ones, number them, enter them into your accounts, and then file them in numerical order for ready retrieval. We should process checks when we draw them. One of the things I find in just about every single church is that we recognize checks and we account for them when they appear on the bank statement. That is reactive accounting. We should be into proactive accounting so that when you draw a check and you pay it, you do the paperwork, put it into your accounts, and not wait until the bank actually shows it on your bank statement. The Charity Commission also say that the check stub is an integral part of the charity accounting documentation. And very often on the check stub, the details of the payment are not too clear. The date is clear, the amount is clear, but who's been paid is not always clear. Sometimes it's Bro J or Sister M or James or Edith. And really that doesn't quite tell the story of who's been paid the money. And there have been occasions where it's quite important to look at the check stub to verify payments that have been made. So make sure that when you fill your check stubs out, you put the date, the amount, and the exact name of the payee as it appears on the check. And then a little word about the purpose of the payment that you have made, because sometimes that is lacking as well. And then this one, never, ever sign blank checks in advance. This is an absolute no-no. And I shan't labor the point. Now, when we come to recording our transactions, there are a few things that it would be very interesting for us to note. Please put down the exact dates. Very often we have the dates, again, as I say, when checks appear on the bank statement rather than when the checks were drawn. Include on your transactional spreadsheet or in your handwritten book the number of the receipt or the number of the check. And if you have been, if you've been using authorization forms and you've numbered these, place the number of that form on your records as well. Make sure you put the name of the payers and the payees down, and the nature of the transaction, and then the accounts which you have debited and you've credited. And this one is something which I think we're going to have to work with moving forward, because I think we need to get a standard accounting system for the local treasury work. But again, the Charity Commission say that we should have running balances on all our accounts so we know what we have paid or what we have received on those accounts to date. And very importantly, we need to distinguish between restricted monies and unrestricted monies. And restricted monies are those which are given for a specific purpose. And the building fund, of course, is the most common one of these. But you may also have other funds which you are collecting for. People give to the Good Samaritan, the Benevolent Fund. If donations are received for the Pathfinders or the Adventurers, we really have to make sure that these are identified as restricted monies, so that when we come to spend it, we also identify it as restricted spending, and we have a clear audit trail that we can show anybody, yes, we have received this restricted money and we have spent it in harmony with what the restriction was. I'd like to now move on to financial planning and the annual budget. Very few things to say on this, except we should prepare and approve the budget before the year begins. Quite often when I look through the church board minutes, I see there's been a budget looked at in February, but has been referred back for some refinement, and it comes back in March, and a little bit more refinement, we're going to go away and bring it back, and sometimes I never see it appearing in the minutes again. Or sometimes it can be as late as the month of May before the budget is actually approved. And by that time, half the year has gone. So make sure with your planning, and I know it's not easy, especially when you're working with a large number of departments in setting your plans, make sure you try as reasonably as you can to prepare and approve your budget before the year begins. Budget both receipts as well as payments. I would say, and this is a conservative estimate, that 95% of the budgets I see only budget what they're going to spend without any calculation of what money is expected to be received in to cover those costs. So please make sure that you budget both your receipts as well as your payments when you draw your budgets up. Include all anticipated receipts and payments. Very often there is an operating budget, but expenditure on capital, such as equipment, audio-visual equipment and that, is not included in the budget, although there are large expenses for it during the course of the year. And then again, show your budgeted amounts by restricted and unrestricted funds. We now come over to the financial reporting, and Victor yesterday in his very fine presentation was saying that we ought to tell the story. And I think this is very important, that when we come to present our reports to church boards, we're not just presenting a page full of numbers on it, but we're actually telling the story that is behind those numbers, because that is what is important. And that is why financial reporting itself is such an important exercise. We should produce a budget control statement, I believe, every month. And you're pretty well familiar, I think, with the columns that are used for that. You'll have one column showing your budget for the year, a second column showing your budget to date, a third column showing what your actual income or expenditure is to date, and then a final column which shows how much you are over or under what you had anticipated. You show your total receipts, total payments, and the surplus or deficit that you have made at the end of that period. And again, this is written in the notes which have been handed out to you. I think it's useful for the church board and for the church business meeting to explain any unusual results when you produce your budget control statement, and any large figures which are over and under budget. Sometimes we don't, or very often we don't, spend the money we have planned to spend equally throughout the year. We may, for example, have budgeted a lot of money for evangelism. We may have put aside £2,000 for it, but the campaign is held in July, so up until the end of June, we haven't spent a penny. And people will say, why are we under budget on evangelism? And we need to be able to explain the reasons behind why we're over. Or conversely, you may have a program right at the beginning of the year and your entire budget for the year is gone in the first couple of months, And people are saying, well, how on earth have we overspent now? What are we going to be like at the end of the year? Well, the story is there is going to be no more expense during the course of the year. So make sure that we explain any unusual figures or any large over and under figures. And again, do it by restricted and unrestricted funds. Getting fairly close to the end now. The Charity Commission asks us to produce what is called a receipts and payment statement. This is an income and expenditure statement. And they say you should do it frequently or regularly, and I would suggest that we should do this at least every quarter. We should show all the receipts and payments we have received by account. We should show the surplus and the deficit for the period. We should show these figures by restricted and unrestricted funds separately. And then I think it's very important that we put a little section at the end of our report which explains some of the significant figures in those reports, which explains some of the trends. For example, the budget offering per capita. Has it improved? Has it gone down? Is it static? Any of the projections, any of that going forward, and any KPIs, which are key performance indicators. These are little calculations you do to help explain how well you're doing. And again, how much budget offering is received per member is a key performance indicator you might like to look at. I think as far as the format of that statement and this statement here is something which the conference may well have to draw out a template so you have something to work to. But every quarter, and certainly at the end of every year, we should produce a statement of assets and liabilities. This is something the Charity Commission say we absolutely should do. I won't actually do a template here. Again, I think the conference will be able to work with you on this, but we should show our current assets. That's how much cash we have in our hand and what our bank balances are. And for the most part, from what I've seen, you do produce this information. But then we don't often include the fixed assets we have, the value of those. We don't show often our liabilities. Have we got a loan from the conference? If we do, how much is left owing? And we don't show the funds, the reserves which we have had. We may have received money for the building fund, for Pathfinders, for many other projects that you might have. And these may be restricted funds and they're in reserve accounts. So we should list these also at the end of the period. And again, show by restricted and unrestricted funds. So, as an internal financial control summary, I'm quoting here from the Charity Commission. They say that internal financial controls are essential checks and procedures that help charity trustees, and that is the church board and the church business meeting, meet their legal duties to safeguard the church's assets. They help the church board and the church membership administer the church's finance and assets in a way that identifies and manages risks, and it ensures the quality of financial reporting by keeping adequate records and preparing timely and relevant financial information. This is what the Commission is expecting us to do, but I don't think we need the Charities Commission to tell us this. I think this is something which we ourselves would want for ourselves, and that's the reference there. So very briefly, looking for the future, what sort of things could we be thinking about? Well, as I mentioned earlier on, I think it would be a good idea to work with the conferences and the missions and the churches to produce a standardized set of accounting procedures and systems that you as local church treasurers can use, that you're not thrown back onto your own resources to get together a system that you think will do, but you're not too sure whether it will or it won't. I think we need to move to the area where every single church has a financial review every single year. I think this is most important. And as Thomas was telling us yesterday, it is actually General Conference policy. We just haven't got around to actually managing it yet. I think we need to look at local treasurer support mechanisms. Some of us are not born treasurers. Some of us have greatness thrust upon us and treasurership thrust upon us. We might be a little uncomfortable with it. We need help. And I think we need to look at the ways in which we can support you so that when you need help and you need advice, you can pick up a phone, someone will talk to you, someone will write to you, someone may even come round to your home and work with you on it. I think that's something which you would appreciate and we need to help you with. So finally, I'd like to say a big thank you to you as local treasurers and treasury teams, those that assist you. I don't say this glibly. I truly believe that you are an indispensable element of church mission, and we thank God for the work that you do. Thank you very much.